would also like to add on to what Tanya said and thank Tanya, all the pros, General's wife Allison, and the volunteers, and Staff Sergeant Weaver, Gunnery Sergeant Schweitzer, and everybody that played a key role in making this a special ball for the kids tonight. So let's give them a big round of applause, please. I'd also like to thank the band. Let me tell you, the band takes every special event and turns it into a spectacular event. Big round of applause for the band. Thank you. And then the folks in the back, all the folks that went through countless rehearsals to be part of the ceremony and to make this a special ceremony. And I got to tell you, this is the 4th ball I've been to, and this was probably the most impressive display of a ceremony that I've seen yet. So a big round of applause for all the ceremony folks. Thank you. Now I know there's we're not just celebrating the Marine Corps' 238th birthday with the kids tonight, but there's possibly, I know of at least one, some of you out there may have a birthday yourself today. So first I would like to introduce the Caltrap, the Division Staff Secretary, whose birthday is actually today, the 23rd of November. Please stand up.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else out there who has a birthday today on the 23rd of November? No one in this entire crowd? Okay. Well, happy birthday to you there, Staff Secretary Captain Rappolini.
Thank you, sir.
Mama.
I'd like to welcome everyone for taking the time out of your schedule on a Saturday to come join us. Alice and Clarity came all the way up, and all the fathers, the mothers, and the kids. A special shout out to the spouses. We as Marines sometimes think that we have the toughest job around, but I think you and I know that actually you all have the toughest jobs, even tougher than us as Marines. So thank you for all that you do in supporting your Marine. We appreciate that. Big round of applause for the spouses. And then kids, this is your ball tonight, so my comments are directed at you kids. And that's pretty easy for me, because deep down inside, Colonel Dan's just a big kid. You all live here in Okinawa. Some of you have lived elsewhere in the world. And I got to say, I envy you, because to me, the opportunity to leave the United States and grow up in another country is something that is going to set you up for success in life. So I would ask you to really enjoy your time here in Okinawa, embrace it, and realize that the experiences and what you learn here is going to set you in good stead for the rest of your life. So along those lines, I'm going to tell you a story about a kid, just like you, who grew up overseas. This kid's name was Danny, D-A-N-N-Y. Unlike you, his parents were missionaries in Africa. So Danny grew up in Africa, starting out in the Sudan when he was 4 months old, when his mom brought him out from the United States to the Sudan. His mother was a medical doctor, his dad a preacher, and also a school teacher. And they were just really helping the unfortunate people in the southern Sudan. So they lived in a little town on the banks of the Nile River in a place called Malakal, Sudan. And the tribe that they were helping out was called the Dinka tribe. So Danny immediately picked up the language, made friends, and by the time he was 4 years old, he was fluent not just in Dinka, but in Nuer, which is another tribe located near Malakal. His father, there were 5 kids in Danny's family, 2 brothers. two sisters. Danny was the second youngest. And his father, to try and get them to learn how to swim, built a bamboo enclosure into the Nile River to keep the crocodiles out. And that's where Danny learned to swim when he was about 3 years old. Another lesson that Danny, and I know you learned lessons here on Okinawa as well, but one that Danny learned in the Sudan was one day Danny was out playing soccer with the Dinky kids, and he realized he was the only one wearing clothes. And he looked around and it just struck him. Why am I the only one wearing clothes, and all my Dinka friends are stark naked? So Danny, 4 years old, decided he was going to take off his shirt and, as a gesture of goodwill, give it to one of his friends. Take off his shorts as another gesture of goodwill, give it to another Dinka friend. And then he took off his underwear and gave that to another Dinka as a gesture of goodwill. So three Dinka kids were wandering around, one with underwear, one with his shirt, and one with his shorts. Well, Danny got home that night, and his mother, Dr. Doris, the medical doctor, had a very nice wooden spoon. And she paddled his rear end a little bit, reddened it, and she said, "We don't walk around without our clothes taken off like the Dinkas." And Danny learned a very good life lesson there, and that is that peoples of different tribes, peoples of different cultures have different rules. It's okay for a Dinka to walk around naked, but it's not okay for Danny, an American kid, to walk around naked. A couple years later, Danny's parents moved down to Zululand, South Africa. That's right, the land of Chaka Zulu, the fierce warriors of old. And he learned, again, playing soccer with his friends, how to get along with folks, just like you here in Okinawa, learning to get along with kids of other cultures. He learned how to throw spears, because Zulus, warriors, they taught him how to throw spears. And then he learned another important life lesson, and that is patience. Because his dad being a preacher, they would go to church, not the traditional church that you think of, you know, a nice building, this, that, and the other, but logs out in the open sun. And Danny's father would preach in one language, and since there were 3 or 4 languages locally, his sermon would have to be translated into every other language there. So a 45-minute sermon could well take 3.5 hours. And Danny was about 8 years old at this time, not a very patient, very restless. So he had to figure out, what can I do to occupy my time while this sermon goes on and on and on and on. So he had a brilliant idea one day, and he brought with him a rubber band. And Danny, his goal was, how many flies can I pile up and kill? Because one thing Africa has a lot of is flies. This isn't Lord of the Flies story, but there are a lot of flies that died in church services by the hand of Danny and his rubber band. In fact, his record was 113. 113 dead flies in one church service. And that's how he learned patience, is by occupying his time killing flies. The next stop that his parents took Danny to was a place called Southwest Africa back then. Now it's known as Namibia. And they lived in a little town called Brundu on the banks of the Okavango River. Across the river was the country of Angola, settled by the Portuguese. And Danny had a bushman friend. And his bushman friend taught him hunter skills, how to fish. One of Danny's proudest moments was taking his first fish back to his mother, Dr. Doris, presenting it to her to cook that evening. Very proud moment in young Danny's life. Unfortunately, there was no good school there for him, so his parents decided to send him to another town 200 miles away to a boarding school. Problem there was Danny didn't speak the language. The language was Afrikaans, which is the language that is from the descendant of the Dutch who were settlers in South and Southwest Africa. So Danny was perceived as a British spy. And let me tell you, the South Africans hate the British because they had the Boer Wars with them way back when, and they remember that stuff. So little Danny, not a big guy, about 11 or 12, got picked on a lot. And they had there at this school what they call the prefix, like head students. They maintained kind of the law and the order among the rest of the kids. And so a head student would grab Danny with nothing having been done and take Danny to the principal and say, he committed this or whatever, and the principal would say, okay, bend over and take your cane. And the principal had a bamboo cane, about that long, about that thin, and Danny would get 3 strokes. And the problem for Danny was he couldn't show weakness, he couldn't cry. Because if he did, he would look weak to these Afrikaners. And then one day, Danny went out for the rugby team to play rugby. And he trained with the team. And in the first game, if you know anything about rugby, Danny was playing in the position of 8th man at the very end of the scrum. And it just so happened, within the first couple of plays of the game, the ball came out Danny's way. He grabbed it, and he ran for the goal line and scored the first score of the season in that rugby game. That day, Danny learned that your circumstances can change in an instant. You can literally go from being a 0 one day to, at the end of the day, a hero. After that, Danny was accepted by the Afrikaners. He learned to speak the language fluently. And in fact, when he went home to his parents on vacation, he would stutter in English to them because he spoke the language of Afrikaans so well. So from Southwest Africa, Danny's parents went back to Sudan. There had been a civil war there. It had died down a little bit. The government of Sudan said it's okay for you to come back. Again, there were no schools, so Danny had to go to another boarding school in Kenya. Within the first week, a bully comes up to Danny, starts an argument, and slugs him in the face. Danny was still a little guy, but this was a turning point in his life. He had a mission. I'm not going to let that bully best me, is what he told himself. And he spent the next year lifting weights. A friend of his had a weight room in his room, or a weight set in his room, and then he had this hand gripper. And he used that hand gripper 2, 3, 4, 5 times a day relentlessly. But after a year, he had hardened himself, and one day, Danny confronted the bully and said, reached out his hand and said, I just want to make things right. The bully made the mistake of taking his hand, and Danny gripped his hand and grasped it and crushed it so hard, the bully dropped to his knees and begged for him to stop. That bully never not only bothered Danny again, but no one else in the school. He kind of cowed away. And Danny learned a lesson. Never back down to a bully. Figure out a way, no matter how long it takes. Never back down to a bully. So Danny was in the Sudan with his parents on vacation, and he was looking through a National Geographic one day, and he saw the mountain of Kilimanjaro, and it looked so beautiful. And he told his parents, can I go climb it? He was 14 at the time. And his parents, being very strong, independent-minded, said, okay, we'll put you on a missionary flight down to Tanzania, and you can link up with a mountaineering group down there and climb Mount Kilimanjaro. And he did. And part of his preparatory training was to do a fast hike from one missionary station to another. It's about 20 miles. Took him 5 hours. Not the greatest training for hiking straight uphill a mountain, but it worked for Danny. He got down there, joined in the mountaineering group, and started climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, and he kept climbing and climbing through one day, a second day, and the start of the third day. And he was like, I don't know if I'm going to make this. And then he remembered a tune, a hymn that kept coming to him, that his father had them sing in church previously. Maybe you've heard it, guys. One step at a time, sweet Jesus, one step at a time. And that just kept going repeatedly through his head. And he was like, you know what? That's exactly what I'm going to do. Take this one step at a time. And when Danny got to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, it was like he conquered the world. And it was like he could see the entire world. Because if you know the geography of Mount Kilimanjaro, the Serengeti Plains, it was magnificent. It was like he could see to the end of the world. But in that trip, Danny realized that he could overcome anything one step at a time. Danny went on back to the States for his senior year in high school. And after he graduated, he longed to go back to Africa. He yearned to go back to Africa. So he got with a mission group and he went to a little town in southern Sudan called Bangalo. And he met a very unique character there, Chief Paramuna. And Danny at this time was about 18. And he had a 250 XL Honda motorcycle. And Chief Paramuna begged him to teach him how to ride his motorcycle. This was in an area where the chief was really the only one who had ever seen a white person before. And no one had ever been on anything like the motorcycle. So Danny taught him how to ride the motorcycle, which was a mistake. Because every day, Chief Paramona would come by and say, Daniel, a friend in need is a friend indeed. Can I borrow your motorcycle? And how can you tell someone no after that? So Danny would let him borrow his motorcycle. He'd roll around, check up on his tribespeople, and come back. One day, Chief Paramona's main wife, because in this culture, you could have multiple wives. Chief Paramona had 5 wives. But his main wife, his most important wife, had been seen by a witch doctor. He had put some kind of needle in her arm and it got infected. And Chief Paramona went to Danny and he said, you must come save my wife's life. So Danny had an ingrown toenail that was infected. He was taking tetracycline. So he put the chief's wife on the tetracycline. And after he was done working on the bridge site, every day he'd go and have the other wives boil up some hot water, place it on her the sore where the needle had gone in, got infected. And between the tetracycline and drawing out the bad stuff in her arm, after about 4 or 5 days, she got better. So the chief borrowed Danny's motorcycle, went around and told all of his tribespeople that Danny had saved the wife's life. So 2 things happened. His tribespeople came and gave Danny a whole bunch of gifts, which was good. He was living with a family, an African family, and they benefited from that. But then everyone in his tribe who had any ailment, any illness, came to Danny and said, you healed the chief's wife, please heal me. Of course, Danny's 18 at this time with no medical experience. But what he did have, Danny had brought with him a big bottle of vitamin C, those big wafer chewable tablets. I think they were cherry, he said they were cherry tasting. And a tribesperson would come in and say, this is my problem. And Danny would take one of the big wafers, break it in half, and say, take this when the sun rises. Take this when the sun sets, and you will be well. Probably about 80% of those that Danny saw came back to him and said, you healed me. I am all better now. And they had a gift. And that's when Danny learned the power of belief and faith. If you truly believe in something, it will happen. So have that faith. So the lessons I want to leave you with tonight are that no matter what you face in life, everything happens for a reason. And everything that happens to you as you're growing up is going to prepare you for anything and everything that you will face down the road. So have faith, have confidence, be strong, be eager to learn, look for new knowledge and experiences, because everything happens for a reason, and it will help you fight any battle in the future, face any circumstance that comes your way. So by now, some of you may have guessed that Danny is actually now your Uncle Dan. That's right, moi, me. I am now your Uncle Dan. And I'm your Uncle Dan because you are children of the Marines and sailors of 3rd Marine Division, the Caltrap Division. So therefore, by extension, you are my family. So as I roam around Okinawa the next 2 years and I run into any one of you, please come up to me and say, Uncle Dan, I remember you from our kids' ball. And as you leave and enjoy the rest of the evening here, I want to thank you for the support that you give and the morale that you give to your fathers, your mothers, because you are very special, and there's a reason why you are here. So thank you. Have a great evening. And Semper Fidelis, that's Latin for always faithful. Bye.